For most of modern history, states believed that organized crime could be defeated through force. Governments launched raids, deployed soldiers, and flooded streets with police. Arrests were celebrated as victories, and violent confrontations were framed as proof of control. Yet the results were always the same. Criminal leaders were removed, but organizations adapted. New figures emerged, violence escalated, and instability spread. The war against crime looked decisive on paper, but it failed in practice. Violence removed individuals, not systems. Every raid created power vacuums, and every power vacuum attracted competition. Criminal groups fragmented into smaller, faster, and more violent units. Communities were caught in the middle, and the state lost legitimacy as insecurity grew. Over time, governments were forced to face a hard truth. Fighting crime like a war was not defeating it. It was feeding the conditions that allowed it to survive. The reason is simple. Organized crime is not just a collection of criminals, it is a system. It has structure, incentives, financing protection, and internal discipline. When the state attacked only the visible layer violence, it left the deeper structure untouched. Criminal organizations understood confrontation. They thrived in it. They used fear to recruit loyalty, to enforce silence, and to project strength. When the state responded with force alone, it entered a game designed by crime. By the late 20th century, this reality became impossible to ignore. Governments began to experiment with a different approach. Instead of asking who committed the crime, they asked who benefited from it. Instead of chasing violence, they followed money. Instead of short-term operations, they applied pressure that never stopped. This shift marked the beginning of a quiet transformation. Modern states did not defeat organized crime with war. They defeated it with institutions. The first change was conceptual. States stopped seeing crime as isolated acts and started seeing it as organized systems. This allowed prosecutors and investigators to target networks rather than individuals. Leadership became visible. Coordination became evidence. Responsibility expanded upward instead of remaining at the street level. The logic of criminal hierarchies was turned against itself. In the United States, this shift took legal form through laws that treated criminal organizations as entities rather than collections of crimes. Leaders no longer needed to pull the trigger to face consequences. If they benefited from crime, they were accountable. This destroyed the traditional insulation that protected bosses. Delegation became dangerous. Distance from violence no longer meant safety. Leadership itself became a liability. The effects were profound. Criminal groups grew paranoid. Trust collapsed. Cooperation with authorities increased not because of morality, but because the cost of loyalty rose sharply. Long sentences and financial penalties made silence irrational. Organizations that relied on rigid hierarchy began to fracture from within. The state did not need to win a battle. It only needed to apply pressure consistently. A similar transformation occurred in Italy. For decades, organized crime had exploited legal gaps and social dependency to entrench itself. Violence enforced control, but legitimacy came from informal governance in areas where the state was absent or unreliable. The response was not more force, it was legal redefinition. Membership itself became criminal. Assets were seized not after conviction, but as part of systemic dismantling. Money, land, and businesses were removed from criminal control and returned to public use. This approach attacked the economic foundation of criminal power. Violence could intimidate individuals, but it could not preserve assets once legal mechanisms were activated. Criminal organizations lost the ability to pass wealth across generations. Without continuity, their influence eroded. The state did not replace crime with chaos. It replaced it with administration. France offers another illustration of the same principle from a different angle. Strong centralization left little space for criminal negotiation. Authority was not fragmented across regions. Law enforcement, taxation, and courts operated under unified control. Criminal groups existed, but only as businesses. They could profit, but not govern. Without weak local institutions to capture organized crime never achieved political scale. Across different countries, cultures, and legal systems, the pattern remained consistent. Organized crime declined not when the state became more violent, but when it became more predictable. Institutions mattered more than force. Bureaucracy mattered more than raids. Persistence mattered more than spectacle. This is because institutions operate on a different timescale than violence. Violence is immediate, emotional, and visible. Institutions are slow, impersonal, and continuous. They do not intimidate, but they constrain. Financial systems record transactions. Bureaucracies connect identities, assets, and behavior. Courts apply rules repeatedly, regardless of who is watching. Organized crime depends on gaps, uncertainty, and selective enforcement. Institutions remove those gaps quietly. Modern states learn that fear is an unstable foundation for power. Fear creates compliance only as long as it is actively enforced. The moment attention shifts, fear weakens. Institutions create compliance through expectation. People follow rules not because they are afraid, but because deviation becomes costly and unsustainable. Criminal organizations struggle in this environment. They cannot scale without legitimacy, administration, and continuity. As violence declined as a strategy, criminal groups faced a dilemma. They could escalate and attract attention, or they could retreat and lose influence. Either choice reduced power. Violence that once protected operations now exposed them. Financial surveillance, legal pressure, and international cooperation amplified every aggressive act. Growth became a weakness. Expansion created leaks, betrayal, and instability. Importantly, organized crime did not disappear. It adapted. It survived in niches at the margins of society. But it no longer ruled territory at scale in strong states. It no longer replaced governance. It no longer shaped national outcomes. The goal of modern states was never elimination. It was containment and irrelevance. This distinction matters. Elimination requires total victory and invites endless conflict. Containment requires consistency and patience. Modern states chose the latter. They accepted that crime would exist, but refused to allow it to dominate. By removing the conditions that allowed criminal systems to scale, they changed the balance of power permanently. Another crucial element in this transformation was international coordination. Criminal networks learned to exploit borders faster than any single state could respond. Money moved through jurisdictions, assets were hidden offshore, and leaders operated across continents. Force at the national level could not reach these structures. Institutions could. Information-sharing treaties, joint investigations, and financial transparency initiatives closed the distance that criminals relied on. Coordination turned mobility into exposure. Technology also reshaped the balance. Digital records replaced informal transactions. Surveillance expanded beyond physical presence. Patterns emerged where chaos once hid behavior. Organized crime relies on anonymity and discretion. Modern systems reduced both. Each payment, each message, and each movement left traces. Criminal groups could adapt tactically, but the strategic environment no longer favored secrecy at scale. Social change reinforced this shift. As states strengthened institutions, public tolerance for organized crime declined. Communities that once depended on criminal protection gained access to legal alternatives. Employment, education, and social services reduced dependency. Silence became harder to maintain. Cooperation with authorities increased not because trust was perfect, but because alternatives existed. Organized crime lost its social shield.